I'm really excited to give this talk for the first time. It's a topic that's very dear to me, which I've written a lot about, beating the feature factory. Most Scrum teams I join, most companies I join, well, actually all companies I've joined have operated as a feature factory. Some companies I've left changed, but not all. So it's not easy. And I hope in this talk, you'll have a better picture of what it means to be a feature factory and also what you can do about it. But I will start by telling a personal story that really illustrates how the feature factory, how you can notice it. So I was working at a company, a big corporate company, and we had our road mapping day. And I would literally wake up dreading this day with a massive headache, really thinking, I don't want to go to work, and thinking, where's my coffee? That was how much I hated this day. Because what happened is once per quarter, all the product owners, around 10 of them, would all get in a room and they would discuss their roadmaps for 9 months, mapping all the dependencies and showing all the business cases for all the initiatives. And it just took so much time. You could imagine sometimes it took even like 1 or 2 days. And yeah, everything would be questions. But that wasn't everything. It was even worse. So imagine we went through that whole ordeal. And then afterwards, I would still need to sit with the CEO and the domain owner, and I would be grilled again. How sure are you that this is going to be valuable? Shouldn't we change the priorities? And it was just incredibly frustrating and incredibly time consuming and stressful. And I really, 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 really hated it. I kind of felt like I was a circus animal. I needed to jump through all these hoops to please stakeholders, to please the business. And yeah, it was really not fun. And I can tell you one thing, everything on the roadmap had to follow certain rules. There were the rules for the colors, there were rules for how to map dependencies, there were rules for the business cases. So I can guarantee you one thing, if more rules would produce better roadmaps, we totally nailed it. I never worked at a company where it was more elaborate and more sophisticated. And there was only one problem. The moment we left the room, the moment we would start working, there was no room for learning, experimentation, and innovation, because everything was filled to the brim with all the projects we already had to do for the 9 months. And then, after this whole circus was over, nobody took a look at these roadmaps anymore, until somebody acted like they were important again. And God forbid, we would need help from another team. Because if you needed help from another team and it wasn't on the roadmap, you could forget about it. You would not get help. Everybody would point to their roadmap. This is what we agreed, and you wouldn't be getting help. So actually, we became masters of like not needing other teams by building ugly workarounds. So why does this all happen? So this is like the prime example of the feature factory mindset. I think the roadmap, if you ever join a company, ask to see the roadmap, because it's where business and IT come together. And when companies have this feature factory mindset, which means we have a feature, it's guaranteed to deliver value, then the main problem is we need to ship it as fast as possible. And that's where everybody focuses on. Nobody thinks about, is this really valuable? How do we know it? No, it's all about getting it out of the door as quickly as possible. And what basically happens is that there's this separation between business and IT. If you're lucky in IT, they kind of work in an agile way, though one could doubt like how useful it is. Because what happens is in the business, they have this traditional project management mindset where it's basically long, slow and long. You plan 9 months, you have a vision, a strategy, a roadmap, a project, you talk a lot. And then it's kind of like, okay, now we throw it over the fence. Let the agile teams do their magic. You will have fast and short feedback loops, but because everything on the left is already dictated, it doesn't really matter. And honestly, what I've seen time and time again, what happens is because you made a roadmap for 9 months, the first thing on there usually takes 2 times or 3 times as long. So from the first month on, there's incredible pressure to deliver the roadmap. And yeah, you lose from the start. There's no way to catch up. And everybody works very hard. But after the first month, nothing gets delivered on time. And I've seen this repeat many, many times at the same company. And it's incredibly frustrating. I want to be clear, it's not limited to software. Like, it's just, we believe we know more than we do about features. Here's an example, not from the software development world, but I think many men will recognize this, is the Mach 3 shaving blade, which was really popular. And they released it in India, and it was a total failure over there because they didn't have as much access to hot water. And on average, the beard hairs were a bit coarser, so it really didn't shave that well. So it was a total dud. And yeah, this is what happens when you just simply believe we need to put it out there and then we'll deliver value. You need to be really sure, is that really the case? And literally, if they would have had like a few people just shave in India, they would have noticed this is not going to work over here. And what's really important is to explain to your stakeholders, this is the reality of delivering value. It's incredibly messy. Like it's unpredictable, it's uncertain, and everything we do needs to be really focused on increasing this confidence that we know what we will be delivering it will be valuable, and not just focusing on shipping. And I always put it this way, like delivering features doesn't mean you're delivering value. Just like telling a joke doesn't mean people laugh. So you need to have all these obstacles and all these learnings that you need to do before you can reach this point that something is valuable. And if you already act based on assumption, it will be valuable, then you're very, very, very likely to miss the mark. And this is what usually people call this output versus outcomes discussion. So I really love these quotes because they really illustrate the difference. So in red, you see the outputs, and in blue, the outcomes. So it's not about your product, it's about upgrading your user. Like, people don't want a better camera, they want to be a better photographer. And Revlon put it this way: in the factory we make cosmetics, in the store we sell hope. So imagine you go to a job interview, right? And you feel confident because you put on makeup, you look like your best self. It's not about the chemicals that are in there. It's about how it makes you feel, how it makes you, when you look in the mirror, what you experience. And how I phrase it is, your effort only shows to the extent it makes a difference to your customer. They don't care what's in there, as long as they can see the difference. Another way of putting it, customers want progress. And this is a very famous quote, like, people don't want a quarter-inch drill, they want a quarter-inch hole. Well, I actually think this is not going far enough. This is a lie. And let me tell you an example from my personal experience. So my daughter, she loves reading books, but we didn't have a nice closet for her where she could put her books. And we have concrete walls, and drilling in concrete is not fun. It makes a lot of noise. I needed to buy a concrete drill bit. If anything, I would have preferred to not drill a hole because it makes a mess, it makes a noise. But so people don't want a hole. What they actually want is the outcome. So when I installed it, actually, I felt really proud because it looked great. I achieved it, and my wife really liked it. It made the room look more organized. So, and the best moment was when I saw my daughter grab her own book to read it, because that's kind of like the icing on the cake. So if it can be achieved without a hole, I would very much have preferred that. So what makes focusing on outcomes really hard is that if you talk to customers, they will always tell you things, but people don't always know what they want or what they need. And this is a very nice quote from a very famous advertising guru, Wilvey. So customers don't think how they feel, they don't say what they think, and they don't do what they say. So, for example, what people declare, what their declared preference. For example, if you ask people, is the environment important? They will probably say yes. But then if you ask, like, hey, how many times do you fly with the plane? Then probably you get a very different answer. And yeah, asking a customer what they want to have, what feature, means you've already lost, because they will tell you the feature, but they won't tell you what they're trying to accomplish. And I think you can best see this when you browse LinkedIn. Outcomes and outputs are extremely popular. Like, everybody's talking about it, output versus outcomes. And here's some things I recently saw when I was browsing LinkedIn. So forget the output, focus on the outcome instead. It's also this juxtaposition of outputs versus outcomes. And the only thing that matters are the outcomes. And these people are missing the point, in my opinion, and I will elaborate on that. So outcomes over outputs doesn't mean outputs do not matter. And it also does not mean that these two things are opposing things. They're actually very tightly coupled. If you don't have outputs, you don't have outcomes. And here's a everyday example, losing weight. So imagine you want to lose a little bit of weight, right? There are many things you can do. You can eat an apple per day. You can walk 12 miles per day. You can stop drinking alcohol. So those are the outputs. but only if it helps you achieve that goal, then it's an outcome, right? So, for example, in this case, an apple per day or stop drinking alcohol might not really help, but probably the walk 12 miles per day will work. So that's an outcome. So you need the output to produce the outcome. It's the outputs that drive the outcomes. So the hard part is when you build a product, you have to find out what are the outputs that are driving these outcomes. And what's very important to keep in mind is just like with losing weight is lagging. It's not like if I would go to the gym tomorrow or I would change my diet tomorrow, I will not lose 20 pounds in one day. Those outcomes are lagging. They take a long time. And that's what makes it very difficult because you need to find out what works for you. What are those outputs that drive those outcomes that you're looking for? And yeah, that takes time. And a very good way you can do this in software products, because I think one of the main challenges why you see the feature factory, it's very easy to talk about features. And it's very difficult to link these features to the business or customer outcomes. And this is actually where the North Star framework comes in. So if you start with the North Star framework, what you actually do is you come up with a single metric, which captures customer value and business value. And this is really important because very often people only talk about business value, but you need to also consider the customer value, because if you're not delivering customer value, they're not going to pay. A good example is Facebook. When Facebook started out, they delivered tremendous customer value. People really loved it at the Ivy League universities, but they had no business model, no way of capturing this value. Now they're kind of in the opposite situation. They're making a lot of money, but more and more people are questioning, how valuable is this to me? So look at Spotify as an example. You could set the North Star as time spent listening to sound. I mean, they not only do music. So if more customers listen to more music, then you're delivering more value. But also, if you have more people subscribing, you will have more people paying. So you have also more business value. So that's really important. You need to have something that captures this duality. And then of course, one metric isn't enough. Then you need to think about what are these inputs that drive this North Star metric. And this is a big hypothesis tree, which can evolve as you deliver stuff. And it's called like a constellation of inputs. And these are all things that you expect to drive this North Star. And an example is you could implement better recommendations. And that would mean that users probably would come back more often. And that would mean that they listen more often. And by having this mental model, you can actually then think about, hey, let's do this. And you can actually measure, does it happen? You can see if this lagging time spent listening to music will actually change. So yeah, here's a nice way of looking at it from a Scrum perspective. So everything on your product backlog, those are the outputs. All those input metrics, those are part of your constellation of inputs in the North Star. And then when you deliver something, you need to watch, does it influence the input metric? Does it subsequently influence the North Star? And then, of course, does it result in this customer value and in this long-term business value? Does it increase, for example, in the case of Spotify, the number of subscribers, the number of people that upgrade? And those are lagging. They can take very long to manifest. So another way of looking at it, and this is actually why many Scrum implementations produce feature factories, because most people doing Scrum focus mainly on the delivery part. And I want to stress, I'm not saying this is how Scrum is supposed to be, but if you hear many people, and especially inexperienced practitioners talking about Scrum, they really talk about delivery, about producing the product increment. And all the events are geared towards that. And the sprint review and the sprint retrospective, depending on how you do it, can also influence these other facets like discovery and validation, but that isn't necessarily the case. So if you also think about it, discovery is basically about talking to your customers, understanding their problems. This is the fastest. Like building software, coding something takes way longer. Like just creating like a high fidelity prototype or a low fidelity prototype or asking some questions. These are super quick feedback loops. And it's really important that you do those, because the moment you start building and you didn't do it, then you don't have a lot of confidence that what you're going to be delivering will be valuable. And then the most difficult part is the slowest feedback loop is the validation. And actually that doesn't happen in the same sprint. Sometimes an A/B test runs for months. And very often, if you subscribe, if you want to increase the number of subscribers, that also takes longer than a sprint. Like it doesn't happen in 2 weeks. So the main takeaway here is if you only focus on delivery and you ignore the situational practices that are necessary for discovery and validation, you're not going to succeed with Scrum. You're just going to produce a feature factory because you're only focusing on delivering something. And this is actually what you see very often, like especially with novice Scrum Masters, like they're sucked in this sprint bubble. Everybody, also the stakeholders, only cares, did we deliver it? Will it be delivered on time? How does it work? And yeah, below you can see many cases. So if you empower teams only to deliver what's in the sprint, so like the features that you agree on, you have a guaranteed feature factory. If you plan your sprints with full capacity to deliver things, there's no room for discovery, there's no room for validation, feature factory. If you focus on maximizing flow, only focusing on delivery, not covering discovery, delivery, and validation, you also have a feature factory. So discovery and validation needs time and sustainable pace for teams to catch their breath. There needs to be this time to talk to customers. If there's only focus on delivering this product increment, then nobody is asking like, are we doing the right things? How do we know it's valuable? Because everybody's just running to produce this product increment. So it's really important that Scrum teams must work beyond the sprint horizon. And I think historically why this doesn't happen is because it leaves a bad taste with many agile practitioners, because we think it's waterfall. Like we think that everything needs to happen in the sprint. And if we work a little bit ahead, then we're entering the waterfall territory. But what's very clear is this discovery should happen ahead of delivery. And what we've also established is that validation needs to happen after you've delivered something. And it also very often takes longer than the sprint. So you need to cover all these different feedback loops. So in Scrum, of course, you have this delivery feedback loop and you have this feedback loop and the feedback loop with the sprint retrospective. But you also need to do the validation and discovery, and these happen on completely different timescales. And maybe a way around it is to see it as refinement. By looking at what you did in the past sprints, how is it performing? That's refinement. Another way of looking at it, what you're going to do next, doing the discovery, calling a customer, planning the interviews, that's also discovery. And one thing to keep in mind to make matters worse, there are very often many teams working on the same product with all these feedback loops going on. So it's really easy to suck the soul out of value delivery if you only focus on delivering what's in the sprint. So to beat the feature factory, what's really important, Scrum has to move to the background. Like perfectly incomplete still can only mean incomplete. It's all about how you enrich it and the situational practices. Scrum can, of course, show you the stuff you're doing wrong, but if you're not doing discovery and validation, it will not give those kind of feedback that you need. And the sprint is not the main feedback loop of interest. It's one of the feedback loops. And we should watch them all simultaneously. And what makes it difficult is that they all happen on different time horizons, and you need to have the time to do that. And if you're only focusing on delivery, that's not possible. And that's why I also think it's really important is these situational practices, which are often in the UX and product management realm, these need to be at the forefront. And I showed a little bit about the North Star framework. You can easily look it up by Amplitude. There's a whole book on it. It's a great way of making a working model, how your product delivers value. And empowered teams are still at the core of delivering value. Nothing has changed there, but make sure it includes all the steps, not just delivery. That's not going to be good enough. And if you remember one thing, perfect Scrum is like perfect grammar. It doesn't matter if people don't care what you have to say. You need these situational practices. Scrum should move to the background. And that's what makes or breaks your Scrum implementation, because if you don't cover that whole spectrum, you will not know if you're delivering value and you're running a feature factory. Thanks for your time. And yeah, curious.